This here is the CIO of Salesforce. And I want you to listen to what he's saying because a lot of the time I'm talking about constraints in your business and how do you check if you're working on the bottleneck or something that matters versus working on something that doesn't really do anything. And I think it's a really good case study for how we can get kind of hyped up with something exciting and it has no impact on our business in any way, but it still feels good. I think this is a really interesting case study for us to think about.
One, it's interesting because when I used to hear that some of these technologies were going to improve the overall productivity of IT by 25%, 30%,
I got those emails too, by the way.
you, you got them too, right? And people were telling me, well, you should just build that into your business plan for next year.
I think we've all been there, right? You get some weird email says, "Hey, just put AI on it. It's going to fix your productivity. It's going to be 25% better." Skeptical that, all these emails saying AI will improve productivity by 25%.
Well, I was kind of hesitant last year, thinking that all of this was going to materialize to that point. But I'm starting to see this become a reality. In fact, in the last measurement cycle where we looked at the lines of code that were promoted to production, out of 60,000 lines that we promoted, we ended up with roughly 60.
Okay, so he put 60,000 lines of code in one development cycle. Now, is that a month, a week, a day? We don't know, but it's a cycle, whatever that is at Salesforce. And we also don't know, is that a division or is it the whole company? We also don't know from this interview.
15,000 of those lines being generated by our AI code generator.
Okay, so there's 16,000 lines written by AI. For those of you doing the quick math on that, that's roughly 26%. So there's those emails saying you get 25%. He's saying 26% of my lines of code shipped to production were AI.
So now, did that materialize in a 26% improvement in productivity? I can't tell directly, but
I think that's the most important and understated part of this entire conversation between these two is he can't tell. He has no direct way to tell, right? So was there a 26% improvement? So shipping an extra 26% lines of code or automating away 26% of lines of code, did that make something that mattered somewhere enough that he knows? And that's 25% of the lines of code, right? And this, I think, comes back to the lines of code are not the constraint on your business, right? It doesn't matter if you have 1,000 monkeys on 1,000 typewriters, right? Sitting down and just saying, like, I'm going to write some code here on my computer. Oh, but now I'm writing it a lot faster. Like, oh, wow, I'm really hacking away, is not going to improve the profits of the company. This is a bottleneck in your business at some absurdly low point where the ability to convert ideas to value is constrained by lines of code. The speed at which you're writing lines of code or the automation, that is not your bottleneck. And I think that's the clearest thing here, right? He said, I cannot actually tell.
Can see an improvement in productivity. I can't tell.
He can't tell. The incorrect measure of productivity, the thing we've been talking against for 40 years in our industry, like, do not use lines of code as a measure of productivity. It is useless. He can't tell if increasing that thing 26%, that is a whopping high number. He can't tell. Like, you can't see anything. That's not good. And why can't you see anything? And so for those of you who've been on the channel for a while, I talk about this a lot, which is how is it that we're shipping value through our company and where does it get constrained, right? And at some point you hit this bottleneck here where we can't take ideas, needs, and problems and turn them into value. That's the throughput of your digital SaaS company, is taking those theoreticals and turning them into value. And this here is not, in 99.999% of the world, not the speed at which you can put 1,000 monkeys on 1,000 keyboards. It's not going over to a dictionary of ASCII art and pasting in extra lines of really nice brooms full of ASCII art. It's none of these things, right? This is not the thing that stops you from creating value, right? I'm not saying AI has no application. I'm not saying AI generating code is an evil or useless. I'm saying it's not a productivity thing, right? It might help in a lot of different ways, but boosting 26% of code's not the thing we're going to see value out of, right? And so I think this is the traditional trap here, right? We say, okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take stuff before the bottleneck. Let's say writing code is before the bottleneck. It's probably after the bottleneck in your company, but let's say like, oh, we're going to boost that. We're just going to boost that up, and then we're going to, what's going to happen, right? We're going to have the natural thing that happens is that void is going to get filled up. So now we're going to have more unshipped ideas, more unshipped inventory, more problems than we've ever had before piling up on us. And you say, okay, well, that's a bad approach. Let's undo that, right? Let's just take that all back and let's go over here after the bottleneck and let's boost that thing. We say, okay, let's do that. Let's make that thing as big as possible. That's humans writing on a keyboard. We're improving capacity in our process in a place that's completely irrelevant to getting more stuff flowing through, because we're now changing stuff after the chief constraint of our system, right? The chief constraint is not producing lines of code. That is not the thing that's going to boost your productivity. Again, I think there's other ways you can see AI helping, but those two things, they don't track. They don't track together at all. So we can't do this and think we're going to get results. And I think that's exactly it. There's a lot of things that end up being this bottleneck here, right? And it's going to be the usual suspects that we've been talking about for a very, very long time, that you just open LinkedIn and you read it and you see all the people discussing we need more interactions between people, we need more clarity, better communication, better goal setting, better focus, things that reduce the cognitive load of our work. Those tend to be the bottleneck. There's a second thing which is a little bit disturbing to me about this whole thing, which is when you are a CIO, you are under an enormous amount of pressure in your organization from yourself, the industry's recommendation, all your peers on the executive team. There's this belief that your core job is to bring costs down. And he actually says that at the start of the video. I'm just going to fast forward to that.
Are very rigorously focused on expense management. It seems like it's always budget time in the CIO's life, right? And now with AI, even more so.
Right. So it's always budget time in a CIO's life. And it's just a true statement that there's an enormous pressure to constantly bring down costs at the cost of revenue, right? It's so busy looking for ways to save $100 that you're willing to spend 1,000. This is a kind of a sickness that's just infecting our industry in general, is how can we cut costs?
Out of 60,000 lines that we promoted, we ended up with roughly 16,000 of those lines being generated by our AI code.
So here's the thing that a lot of people mishear when they hear something like that, which is we don't need 25% of our staff anymore. We can cut costs and bring that down because it's so much more productive. But if that was true, he would have seen something that matters. It would have been as if his workforce increased by 25%, which you would definitely notice somewhere. You would be able to tell. You wouldn't be, I can't tell, but I'm optimistic. It would be, I definitely saw something real. If you increase, suddenly you come to work, there's 25% more people in your company and you see nothing. So adding this did not do that, right? This is not the thing. This is not the relationship. The trap here is thinking it's a cool way because developers write lines of code, and if we have AI write code, we're going to bring down costs. But it didn't work, right? You can see that there was no impact there. So we should definitely not lay off 25% of our workforce, because you're not going to get, you're going to end up hurting the throughput of value through your company by 25%, right? Actually, probably even more through network effects throughout the organization and knock-on effects of what that attrition means. It's a very dangerous game to play, to say my job is to cut costs, or my job is to have this very naive understanding of what productivity is, excited by the shiny new thing. Look for the bottleneck in your company. Fix the bottleneck. Don't look for random areas to increase capacity that are not the constraint to value. That's basically it. And this is, I think, a very common case study. I'm not saying the CIO doesn't know what he's doing. Like, obviously, he's running a very large company. He has definitely some skills, but I think this is the trap. This is the trap of looking for ways to improve capacity that don't matter and getting really excited about it. I think that's really the 2 points there is watch out for where you're trying to improve your capacity, what you think you're doing. And when you don't see results with staggering changes to your base KPIs, really question like, are the things I'm measuring, like, do the things I measure matter, right? If the things you're measuring do not matter, and like as a matter of fact, de facto, the things you're measuring don't even get nudged, you obviously don't have a causal relationship between those things. Go back and reassess your model of how your company actually gets productivity. So that's not it. There's a lot of better models out there for this, right? Dora explains some stuff. GitDX explains a lot of things. There's so many better ways to think about developer productivity than I have lines of code generated automatically. This is kind of a waste of everyone's time. Hopefully this is kind of a case study for you to think about how does value flow through an organization, where are my constraints, and a little bit of a glimpse into the pressures of always trying to cut costs and what that cost will end up doing to your business.